Now we're going to have a look at the trackers. So they are located along here. So what the trackers allow us to do is modulate parameters using the pitch of our incoming MIDI notes. Now an obvious use for this is to actually track the pitch of the notes to get the correct pitch coming out of the keyboard, which is hardwired. We don't have to worry about that. But we could do things like have the pitch open the filter cutoff, so as we play higher, filter cutoff will open accordingly. That's keyboard tracking, which actually is already a feature on the filter. But that's kind of where this principle comes from. But we don't have to do that because it's already hardwired, so we could think of some other examples. So for example, we could change wavetable position by the key that we press on the MIDI keyboard. So let's do that. We'll route tracker 1 to our wavetable position, bring it all the way down, bring the amount up, and let's change it to something quite obvious. Let's try this monster setting. And now what happens is we have a change according to the key we press. That's not too obvious. Let's try a different setting. So you can hear the tone of that changing dependent on the pitch we play. And that's because you can see here that this is creating a modulation source, which is going to our wavetable position dial. Let's try something different. So let's put a reverb in here, and we'll use tracker to increase the mix of the reverb. So there we have a pretty much dry sound. I'm just using the octave button on my keyboard. And as we play higher up the keyboard, we're increasing the reverb amount. Okay, so we'll leave those on so we've got something to play with. And we'll look at the parameters of this. Now, first of all, we have different sources for this. So it could be note pitch, it could be velocity on, velocity off, a gate value, which will reset velocity to 0 once a key is released, then an inverse gate. Now this sets the velocity to 0 once another note is pressed. We'll leave that on note pitch. Now the level control is the amount of modulation that takes place. So similar to the level controls we had on the LFOs. We have a vertical grid. Now this determines the resolution of the grid. So we can change that to whatever we want. You'll see that it's set to octaves, 12, 24. Well, it was originally set to 24, 2 octaves. I've changed it to 12. And that obviously reflects the fact that generally we're going to be working with keys and octaves. We have an initialize option, which is going to reset everything. And we can choose whether we want it to be a bipolar or a unipolar modulation. Now we can zoom across here as well, so we can see the information in different ways. Now we've got different ways of editing within this view. We've got this kind of smooth mode here, so if we double click we can create these smooth transitions and drag them around, so we can get different types of response depending on the MIDI note we press. So we're going kind of low modulation now, higher down there, high again. I think generally, you're going to want to keep that pitch tracking as you'd expect it, but if you want to get something more creative going, then you can do. We then have another option here. And this means we can create more kind of jagged straight lines. We have another option here. Now this time we can actually draw in exactly what we're looking for. So literally pitch by pitch we can change this. We have another option here for kind of drawing in individual modulation values. So you can get really, really creative with this. And as I said, we had that snap to grid value as well, so we can make sure we adhere to the grid. So generally I think you're going to want to use this in the default setting. So you can have higher pitches send different modulation to lower pitches. But if you really want to have every octave transmit a different modulation value, then you can do. So we could have, say, high modulation in this octave, no modulation in the next octave. For example, let's try that. So dry, lots of modulation, dry, more modulation. So you can get really creative with this and have MIDI values outputting different modulation values to other parameters on the synth. Really, really cool. So those are the trackers. So we have 4 of those. So we could have 4 different settings for this, all doing different things. Real potential for creative applications. Now, just something to note on the tracker. So we've been looking at note pitch. Let's try it with velocity. Now you'll see that the note values now change to velocity values, and we can do the same thing now for velocity. So let's actually just arrange this so it's halfway for each. So what this means is now the modulation source is going to be maximum when we play velocities below 64 and minimum when we play velocities above 64. Now I've changed the reverb to the Wonderlust setting, and we've got the size control being changed by the tracker as well. Now let's play a note softly. And then the high velocity. So you see high velocity, no modulation. I press it gently. We have huge amounts of modulation. So low velocity, high modulation, and high velocity, low modulation. So really, really cool. Again, very creative way of working. Okay, so that's our trackers. Now let's have a look at voice randomization. Thanks for watching.